Momentum in baseball is not a dirty bitch goddess like it is in hockey. In baseball, you got 9 innings, you have 27 at bats or 27 outs to work with. In hockey, you got 60 minutes, and when momentum goes against you, we know what happened with the Bruins in Game 2 in 71. And a year later, in Winnipeg, where Team Canada was leading 2-0 and 4-2, and the Russians came all the way back to tie 4-4 in Game 3 of the Summit Series, and two of those goals were shorthanded. We know entering Game 4, the shit was going to hit the fan. Did we not know what was going to happen? But the guy who instigated it negatively for Team Canada was a afterthought because Bobby Hull wasn't allowed to make the team. So this player I'm going to mention was brought in as kind of his replacement. But Bill Goldsworthy lost his mind in the early minutes of Game 4. Now, just a little bit of background. The series was tied 1 win, 1 tie, and 1 loss after contests in Montreal, where Russia won 7-3. Toronto, where Team Canada, very impressive, won 4-1, mostly on Peter Mahovlich's breakaway shorthanded goal, and a 4-4 tie in Winnipeg, where Parise scored early. Momentum was on our side, but and we stayed out of the penalty box for most of that contest. But Game 4 again was played in the newly minted NHL rink in Vancouver at the Pacific Coliseum. The game, unfortunately, it was a bad scene from the early part because numerous players who didn't play in Game 3 were in Game 4, and I take Vic Hatfield and some other key players that shouldn't have been there in the first place. It started with 2 consecutive penalties by Bill Goldsworthy, and the Russians made us pay. Boris Mikhailov, probably the most hated player by Team Canada ever, converted both into power play goals to give the Soviets a 2-0 lead before the 10-minute mark of the first stanza. Now, Goldsworthy, who was starting in place of Cashman, big mistake, was trying to counter his teammates' truculence, but only ended up hurting his team and was criticized privately by Sinden. In the second, Gilbert Perreault, on a kind of a speed rush, scored when a Soviet deflected his shot past Trechak, but Bleedoff scored less than a minute later to restore the 2-goal lead. Now, here was the major turning point in Game 4. The great Rod Gilbert scored a questionable goal that was disallowed in Canada's protest when unheeded. I saw that the goal should not have counted because there was malfeasance going on, but of course Team Canada said, look, it's another thing that's stopping us from playing our game. To Sinden, this was the turning point in the contest, and the result could have been different had the goal been allowed, although Sinden admitted there was a beating. Vikulov scored to give the Soviets a 4-1 lead after 2 periods, but in the third, of all people, Goldsworthy made partial amends with a goal to get Canada to win in 4-2, but then Shadrin, very underrated player for the Russians, scored to put the game out of reach. Dennis Hull, Bobby's brother, scored a too late goal from Goldsworthy in the final minute to make it, look good on a score sheet. Now, all the Canadian goals were scored by players Sinden had inserted in place of players who had played in Winnipeg. Still, Sinden felt that changing the lineup had been a mistake. According to Sinden, Kenny Dryden, who had replaced Tony Esposito in goal, did not have a good game. He was shaky and Trechak was great. According to Brian Conacher, the announcer, the Soviets used cross-ice passing, attacking zone, a tactic that caused problems for Dryden. Dryden has said publicly and privately that he never understood how to defend against the Russians. He was always bad against the Russians. He was bad in 76, and he was bad in 79. Now, Serge Savard missed the game after fracturing his ankle in practice. Not sure if it was from a shot or, Serge was always fragile, especially with some of his leg injuries through the years. Now, Team Canada, unfortunately, was booed throughout the game and was booed off the ice at the end of what's the final game of the series played in Canada. They played 2 meaningless exhibition games in Sweden where the piling on continued. Now, responding to the negative public and media reaction in light of the expectation for an overwhelming Team Canada sweep of the series, Phil Esposito, in an interview with John Esau, made an emotional outburst in a post-game interview. This is considered the greatest speech in Canadian hockey history. I can't do it justice, but here it goes. To the people across Canada, we tried. We gave it our best. And the people that boo us, geez, I'm really, all these guys are really disheartened and we're disillusioned and we're disappointed at some of the people. He's dripping with sweat. We cannot believe the bad press we've got, the booing we've got in our own buildings. If the Russians booed our players, the fans, Russians booed our players. Some of the Canadian fans, I'm not saying all of them, some of them booed us, then I'll come back And I'll apologize to each one of the Canadians, but I don't think they will. I'm really, really disappointed. I'm really disappointed. I am completely disappointed. I cannot believe it. Some of our guys are really, really down in the dumps. We know we're trying like hell. I mean, we're doing the best we can, and they got a good team. And let's face facts. But it doesn't mean we're not giving it our 150%, because we certainly are. I mean, the more, every one of us guys, 35 guys that came out and played for Team Canada, we did it because we love our country, and not for any other reason. No other reason. They can throw the money, the pension fund out the window. They can throw anything they want out the window. We came because we love Canada. And even though we play in the States and we earn money in the United States, Canada's still our home, and that's the only reason we come. And I don't think it's fair that we should be booed. And Esposito said, well, I promise Johnny we'll do better next time. Now, did he deserve to be booed? Yes, for the first period. But after that, he smartened up, and you're playing the Russians. You give them a fucking opening. Like, I give an example. When he played with Team Canada in the mid-1970s, when we returned at the Worlds, I think we were only behind 2-1 after like 40 minutes, and it was 8-1 before the game was done. You get the Russians would pile on, they would really put the dagger to your throat. Now, Brad Park and Frank Mihaljevic, who lost his fucking mind over the Russians, he was, the famous, he thought it was a spying device. It actually was a chandelier that he took it out and the screws that fell to the floor. He also criticized the booing. According to Brad Park, who I've met before, very cool guy, we get nothing, not a dime for this. Brother, I'm sick. Other players were more sanguine. Dryden didn't lash out to the fans. I'm disappointed, but I can understand it. The fans wanted us to do real good, and they're frustrated we didn't. I don't think I deserve to be booed. Tretiak frustrated us, but I guess I didn't frustrate them enough. Now, after the fourth game, the series went on a 2-week hiatus. The Soviets returned home and played a domestic tournament. The Canadians took a few days off, then traveled to Sweden for a pair of exhibition games there before arriving in Moscow. And of course, the shit at the fan. Cashman was almost killed. There was a brawl. Some of the non-starters, I think Hatfield and a few others played. There was some question if Marcel Dion was going to be put in the lineup, and there was some question how many Team Canada members were going to go home. By Game 5, Hatfield, Guevermont, Martin, and Perrault left, but there was supposed to be more people that were leaving. Now, the whole series is available on YouTube. There's the CBC docu-series that was actually filmed my old sports coverage stomping grounds at the Aiken Centre in Frankton, New Brunswick, the capital of New Brunswick. You got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, when a Yankee fan or a Red Sox fan watched Poppy in 2004, they don't think, well, our country's future on the line. Baseball is not country versus country. You have a lot of players that play from different countries. You got to understand, in the middle of the fucking Cold War, they had nuclear weapons pointed towards the Arctic section of Canada. There's published reports. And if something basically happened, they were scared that Canada states would go to war against the Russians if the series basically something would have happened. Because the Americans didn't really take it seriously as Canada. This is us against them, the communists. Back then, this is worse than the Cold War in the mid-'80s. Reagan, he kind of cooled it down a little bit, but you had Richard Nixon. We didn't know how he was going to act. And Trudeau and Nixon didn't get along. So, I mean, it was a weird thing. And none of these games were ever played in the States. Now, here's the difference. The Super Series 75-76, they were against NHL teams. They were playing in New York. They were playing in Buffalo. They were playing in Philadelphia. Okay, they were playing in Boston. Their league against our league, Red Army versus Montreal Canadiens. This was different. This was the Olympic champions going back and world champions going back. I think the Russians had won European, World, and Olympic. I think it was 22 out of 25 tournaments. The Czechs won a few. Sweden. But this was like, our game against them. And what happened in 7-3. If you gotta understand this. If Tom Brady and your New England Patriots plays a college Division II team in an exhibition game and you get blown out, like Team Canada was in Game 1, we didn't know how good they were. Even though Jacques Plante and a few other people said, you got to watch these fuckers, they're crazy. But all the frustration in Game 4. I am 58 years old. I saw that game in 1972. Even I can't watch Game 4. I get completely fucking frustrated. Because I see Goldsworthy, who was not too bad of a player, comparable, let's say, to, a 30-goal power forward in the NHL we have now. He should have known better. Like, he was chasing pussy like crazy. And, that was his problem too. We didn't know what was going on in his mind. But you had players that were benched that should have played, like Wayne Cashman and a few others. Roger Gilbert wasn't doing enough. Savard was injured. Lapointe wasn't playing the power play. You had Bill White and Stapleton who would rarely do something big. Bergman wasn't going to score. So you had no J.C. Trombley, no Jacques Laperriere, no Davy Keon, no Jacques Lemaire, no Bobby Hull, no Jerry Cheevers. And you see these players that give such a poor effort. Goldsworthy wouldn't even make a Team Canada B team. Okay? He was okay, but, in 2024, we know how good Connor McDavid is. We know how good these players are. Do you want to play from Canada? Stamkos and all that. And a lot of people want to play for America. It's different. And the Russians, Ovechkin and the other Russians want to play. But back then, it was so fucking dangerous because we were always 5 minutes away from World War III. It didn't matter what was happening in Ireland or what was happening in Russia or, Israel, different countries. There was terrorism across the world. It was a rough time there between Malcolm X getting murdered and going back to JFK all the way to 73, the oil crisis. I mean, there was a lot of stress. You think inflation is stressful? Try living with a nuclear possible bomb. 5 minutes from now, we got no place to go in North America because back then, before the cutbacks, there was an Air Force base or Canada Forces base every 30 miles across Canada. So it is what it is. But like I said, if you live through it, say like Kelly Clarkson, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But I know, ladies and gentlemen, nobody's asked Gilbert Perreault. This is a shout out to my good friend Alan Globinski, who was Gilbert Perreault's protector with the junior Canadians. Nobody's asked Gilbert Perreault. He said, why really did you leave? Did you think about staying? Because, Gilles Perreault would have stayed. He probably would have been easier the last 3 games. But those last 3 games, we won it through defense. We learned how to play like the Russians, better than the Russians did. Like I said, it's just a complete mental fuck up. But game 4, ladies and gentlemen, every Canadian that's over the age of 55 is a hockey fan should be allowed to go to a mental health facility and talk about 72 game 4. I could talk. I've just mentioned Goldsworthy. I could talk for 40 days and 40 nights how Goldsworthy should not have been part of Team Canada. I will give you every possible angle of that. The guy was on a team, the Minnesota North Stars, that didn't know how to win. All the major confrontations they had in the playoffs, they lost, either to the Flyers or the Blues or regular season. Like, you got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, there was no junior world championship you could bring up these players to develop it. This was the first of Team Canada. What was interesting is, like, Jacques Plante was never asked to coach for Team Canada or play for Team Canada. That was the biggest mistake. So it's pretty freaky. And John Van Boxmer, Billy Harris, and Bunny LaRocque were the practice players for the game. I really think John Van Boxmer would have done well, faster than Stapleton or Bill White. And ironically, Bill White scored a goal in game 8 if he wouldn't have scored. Anyway, that's my rant tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, O.J. Simpson is still dead. So if you feel safe tonight, please embrace it. I'm not saying I'm glad he's dead, but I'm glad he's dead because just Alan Legier was convicted of DNA. He should have been convicted, but it's the way it goes. So being a sports editor, sometimes it covers all the bases. By the way, Tiger Woods, Masters, congratulations on making the cut. It's a mini comeback for all the Masters fans. We're covering a lot of categories, but Canadians were passionate about sports. You always have been. It's a national thing. But as we like to say in Northern New Brunswick, when you're playing the Russians, the Czechs, the Swedes, and the Finns, keep your fucking stick on the ice. Say it like Howie the Geeker. And if anybody knows what that means, McLean is in your tape deck. Have a good one. Bye.